Hi everyone, how are you doing today? I have to piece this block and I thought I would show you how I piece mine. Now, a lot of times when you're putting blocks together, you're going to follow instructions like that. And I don't want to show them too close because they're not my instructions. But I like to lay my block out first so I can get an idea of how it's supposed to be. Because sometimes instructions aren't quite as clear as you'd like them to be. So I have a picture of my block here, right here. Looks in different color. And so I laid all the pieces out, how this block is supposed to be. And I haven't sewn anything together yet. So these two are half square triangles that will be sewn together and so forth. And so right now, these are going to look too big to match here, but it's because they haven't been sewn together yet. So nothing at all has been sewn. So not only do I have to do the rows or the columns or whatever, but I've got to piece the pieces that go into the block, and I would do that first. And what I want to show you particularly is this little guy right here. So let me just move some of these out of the way. So this is a square with 4 quarter square triangles on it, which means it's going to end up being this square will become what they say is on point. So if I sew this, so it'll look, let me see if I can do that too. Yeah. So it'll look this way. Sort of like that. So this is especially going to be big because there's 4 seams to do. So how I would do this first is I'm going to do these 4, there's 4 of them. I'm going to do those 4 first, but I'm going to leave this layout just as it is. Excuse me. And as I finish one of these, or a couple of them, I'm going to put them back in the spot where they belong. Now, when you're working with the half square, and the reason these little stickers are on here is I just wanted to remind myself to tell you that I had I cut all these pieces on my Cricut Maker, and I have other videos, I'll put one at the bottom, of how to cut your fabric on the Cricut Maker because it has that little baby rotary cutter. And I show you how to make a square, half square, and quarter square because they're cut different. And then you just keep them in your saved files, and then you make them whatever size you need for whatever project you're doing. So I'll be sure to leave a link at the bottom for that. So when I cut everything, I made sure, according to the instructions, I wrote down the fabric number, which coincides with my little swatch sheet there, for each fabric. Because, for example, this particular fabric here is also the same one that's here. So I had to cut some squares, some half squares, and so forth. So when I piled everything up, I just took sticky notes, and I generally, if there's no stick left in them, I just clip them onto the fabric or the cut pieces that way. So I wanted to remember to tell you that. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I'm just going to move these aside so it's easier for you to see. So I want to work on these 4 corners, quarter square triangles. And so if you haven't quilted a lot or pieced a lot, it's like, okay, how does this work? Well, I can go back to my instructions. And let me just get the page where the instructions are so I don't give you too much info there. And you can see right here, you sew opposite corners, putting the triangles on the opposite corners, and then you go to the remaining 2 opposite corners. So even though you have this all laid out nicely, you may not have or remember. Oh, just made a mess there. Hold on. You may not know how to or remember how to sew certain sections together. So when you have 4, you do, it doesn't matter if you do top, bottom, left, right, or however you want to do it. You just want to do opposite ones. And when you stitch them, and I'm going to switch us over to the sewing machine in a second. But when you put them on, you want to make sure you have enough. You see the little piece hanging off each end? So I've done these enough that I can eyeball and look. And you can see I have this little dog ears hanging off each end. If you're not sure, just fold your square in half and give it a little crease, and fold your little triangle half and give that a little crease, and then you're just going to line up. See the 2 creases? So then you're just going to line up those 2 creases, and let me pull this down a little bit. So, look. There we go. So you're going to line up the 2 creases. I know you can see this one, but the other one's right there. You're going to line up the 2 creases at the center. So whichever way works for you. And I'm not going to put both pieces on. I could and put a pin in it and then go to the other side and put a pin in it. But I'm kind of a no pin person. I have more problems with pins than without. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this, and it's easy to know where you sew because your 1/4 inch should be, let's see if I can, your 1/4 inch is where this little intersection is of your little dog ear and your square, or it should be, or close to it. I put on my 1/4 inch. Well, I will put on, I haven't got it on yet. I'll put on my 1/4 inch foot with a guide, and I'll meet you at the sewing machine. Okay, I'm back at my computer, at my sewing machine, and I'm on the screen. If you have a Baby Lock or Brother electronic, most of them will have the stitch I'm going to show you in a second. I don't know what happened because I was stitching the other day, but I've misplaced my 1/4 inch foot with a guide, which is unusual because I keep it in a little zipper bag. So may have thought I put it in and it slipped and didn't make it in. I'm not sure. But the other way I also do it is I use my regular J foot, and that's the J foot with the little thing right there. And on my machine, I'm going to try to put my foot back there so I don't lose that. I'm going to try to make it so it stays clear enough for you. If I scroll over in my feet, and depending what machine you have, and I mean a Baby Lock or Brother, where this stitch might be. If it's one of the bigger machines, it'll be under the Q tab. But if you look right here, I have 2 that have a P, and that means piecing. So I'm going to use this first one, which is 1-25. And again, the number may be different on the different model of machine. But if you notice, the stitch is just a little to the right of center. And that is a piecing stitch. It changes my length to 2.0 instead of 2.5 because you're really supposed to stitch at 2.0. And that way I can use the edge of my J foot to for my guide. So I'm just going to bear with me. I just want to put this back where it was. Now, dizzy. And I just need to still have room enough to piece, to sew. So here's my fabric. I'll line it up with the edge of my foot, or there's a 1/4 inch guide line on my bobbin cover. And just bear with me because I'm working over the camera here. And I can just go ahead and stitch that. Now I don't need to lock it at each end because this is going to be squared up. If you really want to, don't do 3 forward, 3 back, just stitch in place. If your machine doesn't have the option to stitch in place, well, just go back like 1 and forward 1 again. Because when you go back 3 and forward 3, and you have your original stitching, now you have 3 layers of stitching in your seam allowance. So when I flip this up, now that's going to be what'll be the corner of the square, and you'll see it in a minute. But you see I have these 2 little dog ears that I'm going to trim off, but I'm going to go ahead and do the other side stitching on first. You'll see in a lot of cases these days on patterns, and I just checked to make sure that my 2 fabrics were even. You'll see on patterns that they make your blocks or your pieces of your blocks just a little bit bigger so you can square them up when you're done. And square them up. Squaring them up just means that you're going to trim it off, and I'll do one. You're going to trim it a little bit to get the exact size that you're supposed to have. Now, when I have more than one of the same type of piecing to do, I want to do them all, but I always take the first one and do all 4 sides before I continue on doing the other 3, just to make sure I did it right. And you want to check with your instructions of whether they want you to have the seam facing to the middle or the seam facing to the outside. And generally your instructions will tell you that. And what I'm going to do, see if I can do it right up here, is I've got my little roller press. And no, I wouldn't suggest you do it up on your machine like this, but I didn't want you to keep switching back and forth cameras. But I want to make sure I give those a little press before I put these other 2 sides on. So, and let's trim this. So after all, we will go back to the workspace camera. Okay, so I'm just going to move that out of the way. I'm going to take my roller. Now, sometimes I will use, pardon my head, oh, here it is. I have one of these also that I can just come along like this and make that edge fold a little flatter. But I find, especially little pieces, I'm really dragging and stretching it. So I really prefer to use the wooden roller. I'll put a link for how you can get one up. I think I have a link for Amazon. But I want that nice and flat. I do not want to iron, excuse me, I don't want to iron because this is just too little for you to iron, and instead of going up and down, you actually you iron instead of press. So if you press straight down, it's okay. But the problem sometimes with that is you'll press, and you'll press in a little crease right here. And we don't want to do that. So we just need to trim our little edges. And I'm just putting the ruler on. I'm going to try to do it so it isn't blinding you. I just put the ruler on so that just those dog ears show. So my ruler's in line with the edge of my square, and I'm always going to remove whatever I'm cutting off before I lift my ruler, because sometimes it might be still attached. And so it's going to look like that. So you really want to do this before you put the next two sides on. Just makes it easier. Don't have all these little pieces in your way. So it doesn't look like much yet. Looks kind of funny. But when we put the other two sides, all of a sudden they'll become the square, and this will be what they call on point. And all that means is this square is now the edge, the corner is the top, the other corner is the bottom. Instead of it being this way, it'll be like that way. You'll see in a minute. So let's go back to the sewing machine, and then we'll finish this one up. Okay, so bear with me a second. I have to stand up around the camera, so it takes me a second. I'm trying not to tip everything over. And because I'm using that piecing stitch, I can have my fabric right even with the edge of my J-foot. If you have a problem staying straight and you don't have any kind of a seam guide, you can take a few sticky notes, the little square ones, and stick a few. And I say a few because you want a little ridge, so maybe 5 or 6 of them, and stick it right along there, and then your fabric can glide right along that edge. And you notice I hang on to the fabric until it's all the way through. If you watch any of my other videos, I probably lecture you every 2 minutes about that, because we have the tendency to let go. I can see right in my foot, and I don't think you can see in there. Maybe. Where the little dog ear and the square meet. Probably can't see it, but my needle is right where that little valley like that's there. I guess you could call it a valley. Oh, see? The petal's on the wrong spot. There's not really any right spot. If I didn't hold on to my fabric going back, it would have the tendency to, I never can remember, but it'll go right or left. And that's why you'll see sometimes when you're doing your piecing and your edges, your seams at the edges aren't as straight as through the middle, just because you got which machine I was on. See, lost my train of thought there. You'll see if your little line of stitching isn't straight at the end, kind of veers off. I think it goes towards the skinnier side. I can't remember. I'm trying to get in a place that isn't a shadow. It's because you let go of your fabric. You want to hang on to it until it's done sewing. So again, I'm going to flip this open, and I've got my finger right here so that the fabric doesn't come back before I can press that little seam. So I'm just going to push it away gently and press that little seam. and it should sit fairly flat. Now, I will give you permission, isn't that funny? I will give you permission that if you want to, if you're just insistent on pressing, take it to the iron just straight up and down. But you really want to roller press it first, just so you don't have that little crease. And I'm sure most of you know exactly what I'm talking about, because it happens, and then you've got the block all together, or you're trying to get it together, and it's not straight anymore. It's because you got that fold in there. So always be careful when you're flipping your fabric over, and make sure you don't have that crease in the fold. So now this has got to be a 3-inch square. And I know that in reading the instructions, but also it's got to be the same size as the plain squares. They all have to work together. I'm going to move that up. Normally I wouldn't move anything because I've moved all this because you're all discombobulated again. So I'm going to put down my 3-inch square. Let me see if I can zoom in, if maybe it won't glare so much. Oh, no, up there. Can I be? That's not too bad there. So I have a 3.5-inch ruler. I need to be a 3-inch square. So my 1/2 inch is out on this side. On most rulers, 2 sides have a 1/2 inch and 2 sides have the whole inch. So I want to move the 1/2 inch outside of my square. And probably because I didn't use my 1/4 inch, when I used my 1/4 inch foot with the guide, I moved my needle one movement to the right to give me a scant quarter. I'm trying to move again where the light isn't bothering you. So before I trim anything, I want to put down the 3-inch because I don't want to trim it all off of one side. So I want to be sure that, first of all, it's big enough. So this one is just like, this is just about the perfect size, except I got to get rid of the dog ears. But if I'm a little bigger, I'm going to take a little bit off of these 2 sides, turn the ruler, and just take a little bit off the other 2 sides. And that way it's nice and nice and even. But I don't have that much left. I just have the little dog ears. Oh. So there we go. So you can see now the square is, the actual whole thing square faces this way. Now that inside square looks like a diamond. So that's called a square in a square. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get the other 4 done. Let me back up a little bit here first. I'm going to get the other 3 done, and then I'll be back to show you the next step. And I got to get this back in order. So I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so I'm up as close as I think the close-up can get. And because I did this block and I did a scant 1/4 inch seam, and I'm hoping that you can see this. So here's that 1/2 inch extra. Can you see how I have a little fabric passed into that 1/2 inch because I want to be able to trim that and make it nice. The same here. Can you? It's hard. Let me see. There we go. Can you see there's just a little bit of fabric in that 1/2 inch area that's bigger than the 3x3. And I still have fabric to trim there and fabric to trim there. Oh, I really screwed that up. But what I want you to also look at, I want you to see if you can see that 45, is that 45 degree line that goes down the middle. See it? There, I'll get my hands out of the way. There it is right there. And it's going to go right down to this end. So you want to make sure also, look, that that's in one corner and the other part of that line is in the opposite corner. That way you're not off on that center design that's there. So I'm going to go ahead and trim the two sides. So I've got two sides trimmed, and remember, I have extra, you can see it right there. I have extra hanging out there. I'm just going to pick my ruler up, turn this all the way around so my two bad sides are here and here. I can put my 1/2 inch right on my block, or unit, whatever you want to call it. So now it runs right with the edge. See how I'm running right with the edge? I want to make sure that, all right, with my, see, I can't do the 45 from this end because this is a 3.5 inch ruler, so it would be off. But see, it's over here. When I had it the other way, it would do it. So it should be fine. Once you have one side or two sides straight, the others will work. And I want to make sure that I'm right at the edge of my fabric, there and there. And I'm going to trim the remaining two sides. So that now my square, or this unit, is all squared up. So let me, because I just moved all of my block pieces all over the place. So let me get them all situated again, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I got everything back in order. I've put my 4 pieces in, and you can see now next to some of these it's starting to look small, but ultimately they all have to be this size, which is a 3-inch square. So you have two choices when you did the 4. Again, I always do one whole unit to make sure I'm doing it right. So the other 3, I put 2 sides on, 2 sides on, 2 sides, trimmed, and came back and did the other 2 sides, the other 2 sides, the other 2 sides, trimmed them up and put them back. Sometimes when you're first starting, or sometimes I do it myself, I'll just do one at a time and put it back, one at a time and put it back, just so everything stays the way it's supposed to. So now we have these, we'll do this one, half square triangles. So half square triangles, we're just stitching down one way. So get a pin. So I have a pin. So it shouldn't, in this case, you should be okay because this is the long side. But you want to flip it over while it's where it's supposed to be. Line it up so they should be right on top of each other. And put a pin. These are batik, so they're a little harder to put. Put a pin in the side that you're going to sew. You don't want to get over to the machine and you fidget it around and now all of a sudden you're coming down this side and it would open up and they'd be side by side. So while it's nearby, it's a little hard to pin while it's right down, but if you just hold it where it's supposed to be and just make sure you put your pin in. A lot of times I'll just make sure this end is good. Put a pin in because I can adjust the rest when I sew. So then you can go ahead and sew that one, and generally you're pressing to the dark side, so the seam would be on the dark side of the dark fabric. Again, sometimes you have to look at your instructions to see what they recommend because it depends how the block's going together, which way it needs to be. You know, what type of block it is and so forth. So I know these are all the same exact way. So it doesn't matter if I'm folding or if the dock is pointing this way or that way or this way over here. It's a half square triangle. You would just turn it until it gets to the direction you want. But if it makes you nervous, and there's nothing wrong with being a little nervous about it, you sew one, you put it back. You sew one, you put it back. You sew one, you put it back. Chain pacing is a little harder when you have the points because, pretend this is going through the sewing machine. It's got to come to this little off the side of this point, and you see how much room there is before you're sewing again. And you could, push it up, but if you're not used to doing it, I wouldn't suggest it. Only because if you stitch all this way with no fabric, your thread will probably jam up, and you don't want to have that issue. So you do one, stop, do the next one, stop, do the next one, stop. When I get to the part of putting this all together, we'll chain piece because everything will be square. So I'm going to go ahead to the sewing machine. Okay, so now where did I get that one? Right there. I'm going to go ahead to the sewing machine and just show you sewing one of these, and then I'll go ahead and sew all the rest and come back. But let me show you how to sew one, open it, and press it. Okay, so I'm at the sewing machine, and I just wanted to show you, if you don't want to pin it, because this is two batiks, they're a little hard to pin through, just put a clip on that side. So you can easily clip something right in the spot it was in on your work table. So I have to remember that I'm left of the machine, so I have to kind of adjust for that. So you can go ahead, get started. Then once you're started, take that clip out. But you want to keep your fingers right here to guide this, or you can do it this way. I'm trying to just do it with my fingers so my hands are out of your way. Because these 2 points should be right together, like they're best friends. And then when I can't hold it anymore, I'm going to come over here. Whichever fabric I have on top, when I open this, that's where the seam allowance is going to go. So if I want the seam allowance to go to the light side, and sometimes it happens that depending on the pattern, I would have the light side on top, and when I push this over, the seam is on top of the light side. But I'm going on the dark side, and I'm just going to press that over. Just a little finger press because I want to make sure I don't have that crease. And then I'll turn it over just to make sure. So down this end, my seam allowance was trying to go towards the light. Didn't want to be on the dark side. Okay, now I know this is going to be a 3-inch square. So this time, let's see where I can try to remember where I was when I zoomed in. Oh, wrong way. Try right there. I got to remember the diagonal line, the 45-degree line, and it says 45 right on it, will be corner to corner when you're, let's see. Well, see if I can figure this out there. So if the 1/2-inch extra, remember this is a 3.5-inch ruler, I have a 3-inch square. If the 1/2-inch sections of the ruler off the unit. There's my, I can see I'm putting my corner of the ruler to the corner of my square to make sure I have that diagonal right, because I don't want to trim off of this side and not trim this side, and then this is smaller than this triangle is bigger than that triangle. Hopefully that makes sense to you. And again, I want to try to put it there. Wrong way. Wrong way. I want to have a little bit hanging off of this ½ inch and this ½ inch, so that I'm not trimming everything off of 1/2 or these two sides. I hope that makes sense to you. So let me go ahead and trim these two sides. And you know, there wasn't much to trim. So I trimmed these two outside edges. The ½ inch extra is over. I'm going to hold my ruler the same, turn my block all the way around my square, and I'm going to line up so that my fabric is in line with these two sides. Now that 45 degree isn't going to run down the middle of this now, but it is running parallel, so you'll know you're straight. And so now I have a nice, see my edge is nice on each side. So I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of them. Before I forget, when you're trimming these quarter square ones, ideally you want to have at least, or close to, a 1/4 inch from, I need a pointer. You want a 1/4 inch from just at that point or above the point to the edge. Okay? You can have a little more, but if you have a little less, you're not going to have a point there. Does it happen? Of course it happens. It's, you know, it's not the end of the world, but it's just something to learn, to practice, to get to when you start sewing. So let me go ahead and get all the rest of these done and the block laid out again, and then I'll show you how we put the whole block together. Okay, I've got all the individual units, pieces, little blocks, whatever you want to call them, put together. So now you can see everything is the same size. And before I forget, when I was talking about, see if I can put this on. When I was talking about that little 45 degree line, having the ½ inch out here, and if you turn it, the line is over this way, or it might be along here. You can, that's keeping that ½ inch to the outside because I need a 3-inch block. But you can turn it so that you get the line going in the other way. You just have to remember that you've used the ½ inch over here, so it's going to look like 2.5. You see that? It's going to look like 2.5 when it's really the other half is over here. So you can use that 45 degree angle when you're squaring up in both directions. I just wanted to point that out because sometimes, myself included, I forget about the 1/2 inch, and then I think I've done it wrong, or because it only comes over 2 1/2, and you have that moment of panic. So I just, to make things simple for myself, I keep that 1/2 inch to the outside when I'm just using the whole number, and I do that on any of the square rulers that I have. So I just wanted to point that out. So I know many of you have watched some of my other videos, and I've shown this method before, but I wanted to have a video that is just about piecing a block and then webbing it or chain piecing it together. So we're not going to work in rows, we're going to work in columns. And we want to think of it like if you're reading a book. So this is column A, or 1, whichever way you want to say it. I say rows and maybe column A and B. So what I want to do, and you can use a pin. In this case, I'm going to use a clip because I'm working with batiks. They're a little harder to pin through. But what I want to do is I want to flip column 2, or B, whichever you want to call it. We'll call it 2, I guess. Over onto, just like I'm turning the page of a book. And I want to immediately put that clip on so I know which side I'm sewing on when I take it over to the sewing machine. I can't tell you how many times before I started doing this that I get over the machine talking to someone else in a class, whatever, or just not paying attention, and sew the wrong side. And then you put it back and you know something's wrong, but you can't quite figure out what it is sometimes. Or you might not notice it until the whole block's together and it's the one in the middle or something like that. It never, doesn't come up. It isn't always pretty. And then the last one. And now I'm going to chain piece these. And that means I'm going to start with number 1, bring it, and I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do, and then I'll show you what I'm going to do. But I'm going to bring this over, and I'm going to stitch this, and I'm going to stop. I'm not going to cut my thread or anything, but I want to be on the end of this one, of this unit. Then I'm going to bring this one up and stitch right onto it without stopping, and then this one, and then this one, and then this one, and then stop down here and cut my thread. What that's going to do is that's going to keep. Now you've got 2 columns in order. They're not going to get out of order. And then we're going to add the next one, add the next one, add the next one, and they're in the right order. So it isn't a case of if I sew this together, and then I stop sewing for the day or the evening, I don't have to worry about anything being in the wrong place because these are all sewn together in their correct order. So when I get ready to do the rows across this way, everything's in order. So it take your time when you first do it, but the biggest thing you want to do is think of it as a book. You're turning the page. When you get to this one will be opened up. We'll turn the page. We'll turn the page. We'll turn the page. And that is, to me, that's a much easier way to think about it. So let me switch over to the other camera, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up this one, bring it to sew, pick up the next one, bring it to sew, pick up maybe I should do it from here. Let me see if I can adjust my camera so that you can see the sewing, and you can also see how I'm picking them up at the same time. So I might have to move this over a little bit. So let me just do a little adjusting, and I'll be right back. Okay, so let's get started. I just took out the space there to move everything over for you. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up the first one. I know that I'm going to sew on the side with the a clip on it. So I just want to make sure. Now, I didn't line them up perfect when they were there, so I need to do that now. But I'm holding it just exactly how I want it to feed into the machine. And make note that whenever you're doing any piecing like this, make sure you take the time to square up and get all your pieces the right size, because if you don't, your block's not going to come out the right size. And it's easier to do this now than to take it all apart and do it again. Excuse me. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so I'm at the end of my needle. I have my needle set to go down. So if your machine has a feature for set to go your needle down when you take your foot off the pedal, that's what you want. So first one's done. My needle is in the edge or next to the edge of this section. I'm going to pick up my next one. Make sure it's lined up. I'm going to lift my foot, and I want to almost bump them together. I don't want them so close that when I cut between them, I'm cutting the actual stitches. Okay, so you can see the first one is down. Oh, there it is, down there. Second one. Picking up the next one, and you notice I'm bringing it over with that clip on the right-hand side. I don't need to twirl it all around. My hand is staying on that fabric. Going for my next one. Now, some machines have what we call the pivot feature. And when you have the pivot feature on, when you take your foot off the pedal, the needle goes down into the fabric and the foot comes up a little bit. So that's perfect to get that under there. So I'm just coming over, and my lever is over on this right-hand side, and I'm picking it up just enough to get the fabric under the front of the foot. Most machines, newer machines, the feed dogs are pretty close to the edge of the foot, so it should pick it up okay. The last one, again, clips on the right. Okay, we're on the last one, so we're going to cut our thread. And you see, I'm going to move some stuff here. It comes out in the perfect order. See if I got to back up a little bit. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to open this up. I don't worry about my seams so much. I will press them, just finger press. If I can, I always want the seam to go towards a square that has no seams on it, if possible. So my goal is one row the seams go one way, the next row the other. But I'm only finger pressing because it might not work out. And we can flip them as we need to. So there's that row, or two columns. So now we're going to do the exact same thing again, turning the page for the next column. Now, it's not going to be a case of picking up one at a time because we're all connected, so we can't go wrong. So when I pick this up, I've got the whole family coming with me. Don't worry about if it's twisted, because as it comes up to your machine, you'll be able to straighten it out. So I'm going to bring it over. I'm just going to move these a little bit. You wouldn't have your work that close to your machine because you wouldn't want these pieces to be dragging over the ones that are in order. So my first section clips on the right. Just going to line it up. Just trying to do it without getting my hands in the way. And when you line it up, you want to make sure you've lined up the top, the side, and this section here. I'm going to move this over just a little bit. Well, let me move it up. I don't want anything to hit on that. Take your time. If you have speed control on your machine, turn your speed down. It isn't a race. Now see, this is flipped over, but I know where I need to be. My clip is right there. Of course, it's the clear one of all the ones to show you. I just need to flip it over because I know on this left side, I should have a square or a unit that doesn't have any fabric over it, where the next two, that's where my book pages are. So I'm going to get this straightened out. So at this point, you really can't sew on the wrong side anymore. And you notice my hand is still following the fabric along. And I'm going to see if I can just scooch my fabric under the foot without having to lift the foot. And I could feel the feed dogs grabbed onto it just fine. I'm losing my pedal. Pedal got away from me. And again, don't be in a rush. Line up the top, the side, the bottom. When you have a seam, I have a seam here, I think if you can see it, and it wants to fold back, you just have to be careful with your foot. Once it's under your foot a little ways, you can lift your foot and flatten it down. So as long as you're not speeding along, you'll be fine. Fast sewing isn't good sewing. So you can get 2 or 3 stitches almost in between before you start to have any issues. So don't panic about that. So now I'm going to lay the pieces out. Let me move these back over again. And I'm just going to open them up. I have my first row going left, my second row going right, my seam allowances. We'll see how it works out. You can't make every seam allowance go in the direction you would necessarily like it to. I would like this one to go to this single piece, but I'd rather have this one go to this way. So right, left, right, left. Did I just do that backwards? Left, right, left, right, left. Oh my God, that was so funny. And again, we're almost done. Flip, flip, turn the page. I will say it is nice, if you can, to have this on the table right next to where you're sewing, rather than like across the room. So if you have to set up a little table or lower your ironing board, something like that, it might make it a little easier for you. Okay, so again, we turned the page. Just going to pick the whole thing up. And rather than me dangling it this time, I'm just going to bring it over. And I would normally be on an angle, but if I'm close to the edge of my table, I can just fold that up on top of each other. And as I come up to it, I'll just open it up a little ways. Whatever makes it easier for you, don't fight thinking that you have to do it like the hard, stressful way. We want to be no stress, or as little stress as we can. And my machine's on an angle so that you can see it. So I'm a little off kilter, but that's okay. I'm going to go slow because I've got seams facing towards the foot. I just want to make sure they don't flip backwards. And you can see now that once you get that first row or the first two columns done, beyond the fact that I'm dragging my, that's why I don't want, when you do it, don't be that close. Because I was dragging my pieces right along underneath here. And I haven't had to lift my foot. I could just slide my two squares, 2 units, right under the beginning of the foot, because the foot kind of comes up like a ski a little bit. And then the feed dogs are right there. So you can see it really stitches pretty fast together. Okay, so I'm going to bring this down. Bring these guys back over again. Can you still see there all right? Let me see. Yep. So I'm going left with my seam, right. And when I have to go left, I just have to push the seam under with my fingers. What was I? Left, right, left, right. You can do yours in whatever order is easier for you. Okay, so before I go any further, I'm just double checking to make sure everything's how it's supposed to be. This is a little star kind of pinwheel thing. Threw me off there for a minute. These are facing each other. These are facing each other. We're good. Oh, pardon my arm and elbow in the way. So now I have nothing in my way here at all. Let me see if I can bring this over a little bit closer. I'm half on and off the mat, but I thought I'd come a little closer to help you see a little better. I want to make sure when I have this down in front of me that I don't have any drag, and you'll feel that drag immediately and know you need to just stop and fix it. I don't think I can do that. I'm wobbling too much. In my close-up camera, I couldn't get all this in here. So I think you're okay to see. And we're almost finished with our columns. I did about 6 stitches on that one. I was looking over to my left, which I can't seem to think is my right, or I think it's my right. Okay, so let's see. Sure got a lot smaller, didn't it? So we're going left, right, left, right, left. So it's getting smaller as we go. Now we just need to sew our rows together. So I didn't cut them. There's really no need to. That's why you don't want to get too close. Let's see. Let's see if I can put something. Trying to find what I can put behind there. Oh, let me do it this way so that you can see there you go. See, just a little spacing there. This one got a little more than it should, but that's okay. But they're all connected, so we don't have any fabric overlapping another or on top of each other. We're just going to flip this down. Don't even have to pin it or clip it, because we're certainly not going to sew on this side. We know the only place is to sew on this side. So I'm going to turn this, and I'm going to make sure we were left, right. Okay, so this little fella started going the other way. And if it happens, it's no big deal. But I'm going to, let's see if I can, let me do it this way, otherwise I get up in the shade. I've got, this seam is going to that direction. This seam back here is going opposite. So I'm putting them right side by side. I don't know if I can give the camera a second to adjust. Sometimes it doesn't like to. It's got too much background. So this seam going that way. This, of course, I'm showing you on the worst one. Going the opposite. And they sit side by side. And you can feel how it'll feel flat when they're side by side. And that's what we want. We'll back this up again. Oops, sorry. So you could pin that if you want to. What I'm going to do first, now I've got those are locked, but I got to make sure that my top is along here is correct and along here. So what I do is I get that correct. I do a couple of stitches. And then I go to that seam. I want to feel the whole way down. And it's nice and flat. I can peek in to make sure, but I can feel that is flat there. So I'm going to hold on to that. Then once I get past that seam, let me see if I can come right over the whole way. How is that? I got more shadow than, let me see if this light helps at all. So now I've stitched just past that seam. I'm going to address the next seam. So, and they'll almost be exactly right because you sewed them one right after the other. Oh, now I can't reach my pedal. And I want to keep checking. I want to lift this top fabric, make sure that my bottom one is right underneath. Are we always going to be perfect? No, we're not always going to be perfect. Oh, I unplugged my pedal moving machine over. Hold on. Technical difficulties. All right. I'm going to go slow because I have this seam allowance that could go back, but it's under the foot now, so it's good. Okay, I'm past that, excuse me, those two seams. So now I'm going to work with the next one. I just got to peek underneath to make sure that that seam, because the seams are only finger pressed, and they could go back on themselves. I'm feeling a lump, so I got to, oh, okay. Oh, so I don't know if you can see it, but this seam allowance started folding back. I just have to, I haven't sewn on it yet. I just have to lift my presser foot up and just put it back down again. I'm past that seam now. Two things I have to address here. I want to make sure I have the end correct, and you could put a needle right across here. I mean a pin, sorry. I'm going to put a clip there. And then I'm going to go back and make sure these two seams are lined up. And so now I'm good here and I'm good across this way. Yep. Okay, let me just move the machine back out of the way again. So now you can see how nice. Now, it's obviously going to look nicer after we press it. Once this block is made, you can go ahead and press. But I just want you to see how, oh, let me bring the, I'm getting a shadow now. Oh, wrong way. There we go. So now you can see how everything lined up nicely. And we'll press that. Then you'll turn it, well, when the whole thing is done. But this will just get pressed, so it'll all sit nice and flat. But you can see how, let's see if I can turn that light up more. Oh, that's as high as we go. You can see, like, I'm getting a, I guess we're casting a shadow here. There we go, that's better. So you can see how everything's lining up nice. The next thing we'll do is just flip this one over, then the next one, then the next one, and you're going to do the exact same thing each time. So I know this video is probably a little longer than I planned on it being, so I'm going to go ahead and sew these together and get it all pressed so you can see the final result. So I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so I have the block all together, the rows are together, and I have to say, because I kept a moderate space between each section as I was doing it, as I showed you before, that they lined up pretty much automatically because there wasn't a lot of room for moving it around. When you have your iron and you press, you're going to press, you know, press and hold it a minute, press and hold it a minute, press and hold it along those seams. Okay, don't iron like this because you'll start getting your block out of square. It just happens. So press, and I will say we have the inclination to want to iron because that's what we do. So once I'm done the front, I'm going to turn it over to the back, and I'm going to make sure I press down those seams, especially those column seams that I just did, and they'll sometimes part of them will be going one way, part will be going the other, but just slowly press them down. You'll have some of these that you had sewn before, kind of half up, half down, that kind of thing. I did want to show you one thing, and I unplugged my iron so I wouldn't set myself on fire. I did want to show you one little part, and let's see if I can zoom in. So right here, I left this because you can see that part of it is up and part of it is down. Let me see if I can see how that's supposed to go up and part of it's down. Now, I'm on the end, so it doesn't matter. I can just push that up and press it. But if I wasn't, and say this was sewn down, going down, this part was sewn going up, all I have to do is take my scissor about the center and do a little clip up to, not in, the seam. And then that would allow this one to stay nice and flat going down and this one to stay nice and flat going up. And I didn't have any, so I thought, well, I'll just use this. I'll use this end one because then you'll get the idea. See how this is facing up and that's stitched. And we're going to pretend this one is stitched here and it's facing down. A little snip along this center. You don't have to get right up to the stitch. Maybe I don't know, a thread length or two before it. and then it'll automatically split that so there won't be this ridge in the middle. In this case, I'm just going to press it up. And sometimes when they just don't want to stay, you're just going to hold your eye in there for a little longer than you normally would. Okay? So let me back this up a little bit. So there's the block finished. When you finish your block, you're going to square up the same as you did, I showed you when you were doing the little individual ones. You're going to find out what the size of your block should be. Hopefully you're close to that. I will say that when you square up your blocks, and you might want to do it as you go to make sure that you're not off by a lot. So if this was supposed to be 12 and a half, and it's 12, okay, unless you make them all 12, which would be hard to do, you may want to take it apart, double check what you're doing for your seam allowance, and start again. If you have them all done, you have to really go by the block that's the smallest and make them all the same size. Having said that, if you have one that's a little smaller, you have a 1/4 inch seam all the way around. If it's a little smaller and you can get away with it, you can do 1/8 of a seam all the way around if it's only off that amount to help you out. You just have to mark that block with a paper and a pin on it to remind yourself when you put them together that block needs 1/8 of an inch all the way around, or maybe it needs 1/8 of an inch on 2 sides. Whatever that odd block might need, don't think you'll remember. Even if they're all different blocks, just put a note on it with a little pin it on, and that way when you get ready to put everything together, you'll go, oh yeah, I got to fix that one a little bit. So there we have it. We did the piecing of the little blocks or units that are inside the bigger block, and then we did the webbing. I kind of call it webbing because you're kind of stitching in both directions to put this all together. I'll mark on the video when the section for the webbing starts. So in case you come to this and you already know how to do the inside parts, you just want to get a reminder for the webbing, you can skip right to that. So I want to thank you for joining in, and if you'd be kind enough to do a like, subscribe, comment, those things all help the channel. YouTube likes to see some kind of interaction. So if you want to put in the chat something you'd like to see in the future, or just say hello, but thumbs up, you can even do a thumbs down, that's interaction as well. But I thank you for joining in, and we'll see you next time. Bye.